7 in the morning, this is the kind of fire we've got burning. There's the airfield, damn. Nuclear bombers have been attacked. Hundreds of missiles, flamingos and drones struck. At Engulfed, the airfield was blown up, strategic aircraft and missile depots destroyed. Thousands injured, the fires can't be put out. We will show exclusive footage and details right now. Hundreds of new Flamingo missiles have been launched across Russia. Bases and oil depots are burning, and this is just the beginning. And as the cherry on top, they've blown it up again. The Druzhba oil pipeline, something is burning in the center. The walls are shaking for Muscovites.
There's the column of smoke. This is what's happening near our home. All the walls were already shaking. Turn off the lights. You can't turn on the lights, they say, because the missiles are attracted to heat. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan right now. Friends, boom bada boom, Russians had their walls shaking, more than 200 drones attacked Russia, and a military airfield in Engulfed was hit. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FABs, KBs, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that KH-555 and KH-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 have been damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The GOR successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter were hit, and 13 Russian radar stations were destroyed. But Russia also claims that the armed forces of Ukraine attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one IL which delivered missiles. Here it says, in the morning, an IMS IL-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of missiles. A-101 and in Engulfed, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is, to what extent? Why? Because there was a large-scale attack, both with drones and most likely with a missile. That Big Bang, since it was a Big Bang, was caused by a fifth element that pierced the roof. If anyone remembers that movie, it was probably one of our missiles, and I wouldn't even rule out the possibility that a long-range Neptune was used in that direction. And naturally, the detonation that occurred after the strike, and the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and even the small arms ammunition loaded onto the planes. Naturally, the planes parked nearby were damaged as well. There was no way they could have avoided damage. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think within a few days, our intelligence, our general staff will confirm it after collecting information from satellites and images, decoding them, in other words, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll have another reason to celebrate. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm it with certainty.
Roman Grigorievich, what could have been hit? The bombers themselves, the storage facility for cruise missiles, and the aviation fuel depot. These elements were the targets for Ukraine's armed forces, our missiles, and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, just to give you a clear idea, very much like a large bustling city, where in addition to the airfield itself, a truly huge amount of complex infrastructure and support systems is involved to properly maintain it. A large number of infrastructure facilities of various types, starting with underground fuel storage tanks holding tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, and ending with some of those same storage depots. And the SIS, which is especially important, is the Special Engineering Service for Missile Preparation and, of course, the storage of aerial bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, they are still far away and not many people talk about this, but south of Engulfed, several dozen kilometers away. On the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility, the so-called Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site, or more precisely, a storage facility for nuclear warheads for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles located there. Of the 12th GUMO, the 12th main directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically for tactical nuclear weapons. So it's just a few dozen kilometers, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engulfs. There, it would be a real massive mushroom cloud. And as for Kazakhstan, the Kazakhs would have already seen it. It's a pity, really. I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I feel sorry for them to disappoint them like that. But nevertheless, this is such a serious facility that you can't just hit it with missiles or drones. To flatten it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers for carpet bombing. But if you blow up this underground fuel storage, I'll say it again, tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers, a single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on board the equivalent of 3 railroad tank cars of this kerosene. They fill more than 150 tons of aviation kerosene there. And for the Tu-95, it is 1 railroad tank car, which is also quite a lot. So there is a reason to strike there. A hit that could be delivered to this entire facility could be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our planes, the Tu-160, the Tu-95, and the Tu-22, as well as our Kh-55s. Back then, under Kuchma, hundreds of missiles were handed over. It was Kuchma who was dealing with this, at least. And now we're going to try to destroy essentially the very same Sariev bombers that we once handed over to the Russians. So specifically, what was actually hit? That will become clear within a few days once the satellite images have been analyzed.
Roman Igorovich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases or airfields?
The thing is, they perform different tasks, and the area involved also varies. There should be at least a regiment stationed there, that's for sure. About 1,500 Russian servicemen should be involved in this process. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Igorovich?
Well, definitely 100%. The thing is, even the SIIS, that's the engineering and technical service, the special engineering service, and of course the security and defense of the facility itself, and the storage of missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches. There are even certain specific mechanisms involved. There are climate control systems, especially for missiles of this type. So several dozen people were definitely taken out, and the remaining hundreds were certainly cleared out by this strike. Believe me, the shockwave there was like in Syria.
Roman Igorovich, indeed. Right now, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a day after the drone attack, and everyone is talking about the long Neptune. The modified missile, let's discuss this missile, as well as the strikes on oil refineries, bases, and on Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
The sanctions of Malyuk and Budanov have now become the sanctions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Why? Because in such strikes, like the one on Engels, the security service of Ukraine and special operations forces were naturally involved. That's the minimum. And probably also the Navy, if Neptune was used, since that's a coastal missile system, a launch platform. At the very least, they are being used. But I think within a day it will become clear. Long Neptune long, it's the same situation, meaning it's a launch. It's launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, the Navy is involved in this. The main targets for this kind of cruise missile are objects that need to be penetrated. For example, a 150-kilogram warhead is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms, or even 50, whatever they carry. And the warhead that is a 150-kilogram warhead can reach the target and detonate. For example, as we see now, presumably, let's say for now, presumably, a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs was blown up in Engels. Well, naturally, the same warhead could be used against TUAPs or to breach their detonation systems or at the pumping stations. This is one of the main objectives. Right now, for us, God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these representatives, not from our government, are running around with the idea of how to secure Russia's hydrocarbon industry. So, God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If last year in May the sanctions hadn't been stopped. Malyuk, Budanov, this year there wouldn't have been any because there would have been nothing left to destroy. We all would have simply survived over the past year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's a basic missile. Ours, the Neptune, has the long on Neptune, but it's a basic missile, and also the Kh-35. At one time, it was also produced at our facility. Our engines for this missile, turbojet engines, dual circuit missiles, there was the air-to-ship version. That's its main purpose, meaning it's an anti-ship system. The missile, which was later was upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, and with a good engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now cover more than 500 kilometers. So at the very least, it has reached a range of 500 kilometers. I think regarding Engulfed, it could have been used there as well, because they basically opened up a warehouse that had been sealed. These missiles are not just lying around outside. In other words, it was sealed, and since it was breached, it most likely means a missile got in. But there is no confirmation yet, so we won't confirm it either for now. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Illich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new possibilities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we establish that now.
Well, the range of the missile, at least the confirmed range, is definitely 500 to 600 kilometers. We've seen this with TUAPs and maybe now with Engels as well. Yes, Engels is a little over 600 kilometers away. That's the actual stated range. So what does that mean? 500 to 600 kilometers. That's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to TUAPs. Just draw that circle. That's everything we can reliably hit with this missile. But the stated range is 1,000 kilometers. You could, for example, set a compass at St. Petersburg and draw a semicircle almost reaching the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would reach beyond the Volga, at least past Engels and Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this missile would reach the North Caucasus if the stated range matches the actual flight range. Technically, it's possible. Overall, the engine is very good. Our engine, the one we produce, will definitely run for an hour, and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. But running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. That is, it depends on how many extra buckets you fill up. The missile will fly as far as the amount of fuel you put in allows.
So Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure facilities could be attacked?
Well, definitely. They're already under serious targeting. And in order to fully accomplish our objectives, for example, to ensure the security of our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to reach as far as the Urals. It's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But as for cruise missiles, it's hardly worth it, let's say, to make cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, they're a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. So for this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, in other words, ballistic missiles. I think we'll resolve this issue not this year, but next year.
Roman Nikolaevich, there's more good news. The main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in occupied Crimea. Under air defense system strikes, both naval vessels and a helicopter were hit. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including the one L-125, NIO-BSV, NIBSV, and BRL-SMS. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time, and it has now been documented.
Well, this definitely took several months. This is the work of the GUARs, USVs, Magur, the main Directorate of Intelligence and the Security Service, their own USVs. They practically turned these unmanned boats into aircraft carriers. Both of them did. Both the GUR's Magur and the SBU's Cyber-V, they can now operate and function almost like aircraft carriers, essentially carry an unmanned aerial vehicle. Moreover, these UAVs, they can carry both aerial drones and unmanned surface and underwater vehicles. In other words, they can serve as a kind of mothership and relay station at the same time. Presented here is a specialized maritime vessel, measuring several meters in total length and of a specific width, that is capable of taking sophisticated unmanned aerial vehicles on board, for example, and can approach the coast of Crimea or some other Russian territory, effectively closing the distance to those strategic coastal areas. And from several kilometers off the coast, it can launch drones under direct control using the boat itself as a relay station. The guys can carry out a combat mission just as they do directly with, say, those same FPV drones. That is, from a certain point, the drone, let's say the Biplashka, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, destroys an anti-aircraft missile system, a complex or some kind of military facility, depending on the capabilities. Plus, especially the GUR's more drones can also carry air-to-sea missiles. Yes, so starting from the base, it's an R-73 air-to-air missile, an excellent missile that's been around for half a century, and thousands of them have been produced. We have thousands of these, and they have a heat-seeking homing head. If you lock it on, the missile will acquire the target and catch up to it. And if there are 2 missiles on the more drones, 2 missiles, that means they can also destroy aerial targets. Here's confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed. In fact, it wasn't just one. One was completely destroyed and the second was seriously damaged. So the GUR guys have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has entered a field that isn't typical for them, and they've done quite well there. And then there's Malyuk's security service, meaning the GUR under Budanov's command and the SBU under Malyuk's command. Together, they cover almost the entire spectrum. Now they're using strike weapons, and what's important is that they're producing them on their own base. These are intelligence agencies doing it on their own base at their own expense. They still have relatively small budgets. These aren't the Ukrainian armed forces, not those huge multi-billion or even 100 billion budgets. But still, they managed to find sponsors on their own, most likely, and perhaps even carried out these kinds of tasks. Well, good for them. There's nothing more to say.
Before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian war correspondents, I'd like you to give a brief overview of the Ukrainian Hrom-2 missile system. What are its potential capabilities and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
To understand the process, what is the Hrom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander. In terms of range, warhead, and control system, it's the same as the Iskander. We have one like that. Several decades ago, a significant defense project was launched, known as the Sapsan program. Based on the technology from this Sapsan initiative, a solid fuel propulsion system was developed for the Hrom tactical missiles. Ballistic missiles, and naturally the project yielded results. That is, work was done on this project, Hrom-1 and Hrom-2. Now we have achieved a range of 300 kilometers. We made it and sold it with an audit to the Saudis, by the way, including selling the technical documentation as well. But most likely, the intervention of our partners allowed us to at least get the technical documentation back. Maybe some launches, maybe even some missiles as well. I wouldn't rule that out. So what is the Hrom-2? It's basically the same as the Iskander. 500 kilometers, Moscow to Ups. That's those 500 kilometers. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka. Remember, we once talked about this. We said it would be better for the Rubliovka elite to get as far away as possible from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made.
Why? Because the first Hrom should definitely bury Lenin. How much longer does he have to lie there? After all, the Kremlin is the first target and the second is Rubliovka. Or on the contrary, depending on preference. Maybe Rubliovka will actually be the first to go. Roman Yakovlevich, now, of course, this information has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents, because in Russia they are claiming that the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What do we know about this? Let's analyze it.
To understand the process, we have about 600 kilometers of border, if you do not count the curves, so to speak, but just the straight border with Belarus. And a fragment of that is between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, that's the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions. Yes, that fragment. On the Russian side, it's the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. So our main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. Yes, to change the architecture of the front, to open the northern front. It's already open since we started moving into the Kursk region. The Kursk direction towards Moscow is called that by some extremely delusional idiots. As part of the main task of tying down enemy forces, several tens of thousands of Russian soldiers were pinned down there. And naturally, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, there are different names for it. You could call it a support zone if it's a front line and a mine strip, about 30 kilometers. We need to create such a security zone deep inside Russian territory. A demilitarized one, but the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So such a buffer zone can be created not even by advancing 30 kilometers. You can go in 3, 5, or 7 kilometers, but onto Russian territory, mining not our land, but Russian territory, laying several 100,000 of these mines there. That way they'll be digging them out for 100 years if they even want to at all. And naturally, army artillery can add another 25 kilometers to the creation of such a buffer zone beyond the initial 30 kilometers. In the Kursk direction, we did it, we accomplished it. The only retreat, we've already talked about this, the withdrawal was almost catastrophic because it was untimely. A decision was made to withdraw and redeploy into defensive positions. This is exactly what we're doing now in the Belgorod region. It's essentially the same operation, just not as deep, without an operational breakthrough. It's a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best defensive positions. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation. This is the so-called central Russian upland, with height differences of 50 to 70 meters. And between, well, just so you understand, between the hills, yes. So the rivers, or rather the small streams that are there, the little creeks, they're at about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So these elevation differences, it's best to take control of the high ground, no matter where they are, whether on our side or the Russian side. If there's an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now in the Demidovka area, a mission is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating this kind of buffer zone. And the second is to try to intercept Russian reserves that will now be freed up from the Kursk direction. As we withdraw along the borderline, they will be redeployed to the Eastern Front so that they don't end up in the Pokrovsk direction, where they have about 2 divisions. Maybe that's it. Almost 30,000 Russian troops could now be transferred from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front, and they'll be passing right by, somewhere nearby, along, or rather through the Belgorod region. And in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod region. There's a positive trend at the moment, at least for now. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters, even if we knew them. Well, you can't broadcast tactical information on air. But in reality, I think in a week, we'll talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians claim to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already debunked this fake. So what? Andriy Demchenko reports that Russians are storming the Sumy region border on ATVs. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hrihorovich?
Well, they got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was a really good video sequence showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, Russian psychological operations will logically, from their perspective, they couldn't have responded any other way, even if their actions were wrong. We should also take a page from their book. Our Center for Countering Disinformation, our information specialists, our Central Election Commission should learn from this too. After all, the FSB, their specialists, the old KGB hands, they've been doing these psychological special operations for 100 years. They had to carry out this kind of psychological operation because it really rattled the Russians. The appearance of the F-16 practically right at the line of contact. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely involving the dropping of certain munitions. Beneath the radar horizon of the Russian air defenses, naturally, no one could reach it. And this really shook the Russians in that direction. Naturally, they needed to counter this information, so they came up with another psychological operation, claiming they shot down an F-16 in that direction. And believe me, no one shot anything down. I have friends, quite a few friends, who, if anything had happened, would have shared the information. I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The guys are working along the entire line of contact on F-16S and Mirages. They have already gone out on combat missions, diligently carrying out tasks in those specific directions where it is possible, based on the density of the enemy's air defenses and our own strategic ability to cover these aircraft. God's due. So first, fill in the blanks yourself so I don't have to swear too much. This so-called God's due in Trump's eyes, which was orchestrated by Putin. For what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure. The Ukrainian side is also conducting the same IPSO, an information psychological special operation in which the top officials of the state are involved. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? In order to give the Russian population, mainly, and of course Trump, and to try it out on Ukraine, to suppress them, to paint some other picture of the real events happening on the Kursk land. We are holding the Kursk land. No one is encircled there. We are holding our ground. And the retreat, yes, there was a retreat, indeed, a belated flight. If, as we said, a month and a half ago, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled move to defensive lines. This was a flight, but still to the defensive lines, which are on Russian territory. The difference is that the Sudza River in Kursk, along the Kurshina, which runs there, the Pereplyuka stream, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. Nearby, further south, the elevation is already about 220 meters. So here there is at least a 50 to 70 meter difference in height. an elevation difference. And this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudza direction have taken up positions. And at this point, we don't want to retreat any further. No one intends to. Naturally, the Russians need to show that they're surrounded there, that everything is lost. Boss, the client is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything's lost, and so on. They're trying to cut us off, but they're still very far from encircling us. It's simply unrealistic because along the borderline, there are these ridges, and our troops are positioned there as well. On Kursk land, I don't think we'll be leaving from there. It's a good defensive line. And the Russians who are trying to cut off our direction have gotten stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, this is the Sumy region. It's Sumy territory, and it's only a few kilometers from the borderline. That's all there is to it. They're trying to somehow break through to cut off the supply to this group. As for the group in the information space to somehow ramp up the pressure, well, Putin threw some divine dew, so to speak, at Trump, and now Trump is mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu. In the Middle East, once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, and in Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their weighty statement there, it won't end well for anyone. That's for sure. Most likely, strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, and Trump has been dragged into them. And now they have nowhere to turn. Well, Witkov got involved, and after all, he's such a great Israeli-American or American-Israeli. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds and at all levels will keep burning, maybe not with the same intensity, and it will be presented a bit differently. Not sanctions or the Ukrainian defense forces, but the work of the local underground at various levels. I think, by the way, that this kind of work by our informants can be just as effective, just like now with the Ukrainian defense forces. Believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians are definitely fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. They won't stop, and you won't be able to turn around several million residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, or Crimea.
Dear audience, please like this video and leave a comment. Write a few kind words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine and share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. Renowned analyst Roman Svetan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.